Tonight's episode was first broadcast on the 25th of October 1993. It was directed by Cliff Bowl, after whom the Bolians were named. The story is by Gene Woland and John Wright, and the teleplay is by James Crocker. In terms of content warnings, the subject of war orphans, children abandoned by their parents, runs throughout the episode, and so we'll be broaching topics around occupation, war, also xenophobia, racism, death in war. Adoption is a very strong theme in this episode, and also allegations of emotional and physical abuse of a minor. And I will turn over to Tim for a plot summary from Wikipedia.
Thank you,
Tim.
Thank you so much, Kat, and thank you very much for the intro. So yes, as always, we do fly through a quick summary of the episode at the top, just to benefit you who may not have actually watched it. So this is a quick wash-up. Thank you very much to the editors on Wikipedia. Please support Wikipedia. It's great, and in these difficult times, it's very helpful to have a truly independent source of information out there. So here is the plot. When Garak sees a Cardassian boy in Deep Space Nine, he decides to introduce himself, but the boy, Rugal, bites him on the hand. The boy has been raised by Bajoran parents and taught to hate and fear Cardassians. His adoptive parents claim that they do not consider him a Cardassian anymore, but allegations of abuse lead to an investigation into the family. Gul Dukat, the Cardassian officer who was the prefect or ruler of Bajor during the occupation, tells DS9's commander Benjamin Sisko that he is trying to bring orphan Cardassians back from Bajor, and that the discovery of Rugal will strengthen his case. Miles and Keiko O'Brien agree to care for Rugal during the investigation. Rugal helps Miles overcome his prejudice against Cardassians. Garak, suspecting, or perhaps knowing, that there is more to this series of events than meets the eye, persuades Bashir to request permission from Sisko to allow them to travel to Bajor and investigate. Sisko grants the request after Dukat informs him, surprisingly well-timed, that Rugal is the son of a prominent Cardassian civilian politician, Khotan Batar. Garak and Bashir investigate records at an orphanage that took in Cardassian orphans when the occupation ended. Garak suggests that the situation is tied to a conflict between military and civilian interests on Cardassia. Badar is a political rival of Dukat, having cost Dukat his position as prefect by ordering the Cardassian withdrawal from Bajor. Back on the station, Badar arrives to greet Rugal, but the boy does not remember him and calls Badar a Cardassian butcher. Regardless of this, Badar wants his son back, but Rugal's adoptive father refuses to relinquish him. A formal tribunal is established, headed by Sisko, because this is Star Trek and we love a courtroom scene, who is seen to be a neutral arbiter. The Federation. Dukat attends the ensuing hearing. Why? Nobody knows. Only him. Meanwhile, on Bajor, Garak and Bashir track down the woman who took Rugal in at the orphanage, who remembers that a Cardassian woman, a military officer attached to Terok Nor, the Cardassian name for DS9, brought Rugal to her. Bashir interrupts the hearing, alleging that Rugal's discovery was part of a conspiracy planned by Dukat all along. That Dukat ordered one of his subordinates to leave Rugal behind, knowing that the boy would one day be found, and as a result, Badar would be humiliated. The plot having been exposed, Dukat storms out of the room. Sisko awards custody of the boy to Badar, who reassures Sisko that Dukat will never reveal what happened now that he too has been humiliated. Later, Bashir and Garak sit down for lunch. Bashir asks Garak for the truth about his history with Dukat. Garak smiles and tells him to notice the details, which he compares to crumbs scattered across the table. Scene. So, Kat, I've just talked for a very long while, so I'll now throw to you for your kind of initial impressions on this one, please.
Thank you. I think in some ways the episode really takes me back to Duet in season 1, which was also very strongly Cardassian Bajor based. But I think unlike Duet, this one doesn't have a very, very strong narrative analogue with precise things that happened in our world. I think it was fair enough to say that Duet was about the Holocaust. This one is a story that takes place on Bajor and between the Bajorans and the Cardassians. While war orphans are a real thing in our world, the precise details of this plot and scheme are just very very distinct. They really want to tell a story about two races who look completely different. And it's a very interesting one. I think it does an interesting job of mixing a very personal story of a boy and what is happening to him, and the emotional beats of that, I think, are hit very well, along with the political machinations that his whole life has been about, effectively. And I think it does in 45 minutes, it does a good job of addressing both. I think that it wraps up far too quickly and without. It wraps up off screen. Sisko gives a station log in which he describes what's actually going to happen to the boy.
That's a bit of a theme. I think we've mentioned that in a few other episodes where it feels like they've gotten to the end and they've kind of like, oh my god, we're running out of time, and they've just fudged together a swift exit to the episode. Does that kind of feel familiar?
I think there are some good episodes. There have been some really strong episode endings. I mean, Duet is one of them. The man gets murdered at the end of the episode.
Outstanding, yeah, terrifying.
There's also our least favourite episode where someone is summarily murdered moments before the episode.
God, yeah.
So I don't think it's not a consistent habit of theirs,
No.
and I hope it's one they're not going to indulge too much, because I just felt that the boy didn't get his shrift, and I also. We'll get into it more as we talk about the episode, but I think that there's a strong theme there about a child's right to determine their own future, what happens to them. And that really isn't gone into much. It's very much left up to the adults around him, only one of whom, Miles O'Brien, keeps coming back to him and saying, maybe you have something to say about this. What do you want? Would you like to visit me in the future? Everyone else is just, this is what's best for the boy, obviously. And I think some of that's probably about the politics of the 1990s. And what the state of children's rights was at that time.
Interesting, yeah. I do hope you'll go into more details as we get through the episode, because I think you touched on a really good point there. So I'll throw my two penneth in. I loved it because I enjoy machination episodes, and I thought it was very good at further building on. Cardassian society and Bajoran society, and we're finally getting beyond, I think, a bit of a TNG hangover, which is, as TV tropes puts it, the planet of hats. Klingons, honourable. Romulans, sneaky. Ferengi, villains. No, seriously, villains. Oh, fine, they're not villains. We're getting to see more of both of these societies, and and the conflict between them, and their values and how those collide as well. So I thought it was good for that. It was good at the broad strokes, and shame on me. I hadn't really realised until you just said it that by the end of this episode, I don't think that Rugal has stopped being an element in a plot. Then he's just like, well, that's the way the chips fall. Sisko summarily deports him to Cardassia, bang, and there's just like no discussion. We don't even see Procor, his Bajoran father, again. He is not in the episode at that point. It's just written off, which I think is an example of them slightly fumbling it towards the end.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is a lot to ask in 45 minutes to include all of this information, having started from a position of we don't know what the hell's going on, and it's intriguing. They do a really good job of that. But they don't. Yeah, at the end, they do not manage to do right by the kid, I don't think. And that's a real shame in an episode that was really trying to investigate the problem.
Exactly. I think the only thing you could retroactively say is, that it reflects a bad approach to child custody and child rights, and in itself is a bit of a damning reality check. It's like, guess what? Rugal does not come out of this well, because that's the way these things go, that this guy has been chewed up in the gears of intergalactic politics, and he's gone from one system that's shattered into another system that doesn't really care. We get alleged a few times that orphans and illegitimate children are looked on unfavourably in Cardassian society, which is the thing we keep coming back to. So, if anything, you could read it as just, wow, there isn't a happy ending here, because there is no happy ending under any of these systems. I think the only other thing would be a Picard-style, seek asylum in the Federation, and we shall raise you as a model Federation citizen, which doesn't happen. That doesn't come up weirdly.
Yeah.
So,
and I wish that a potted version of what you've just said was actually stated in the episode. I wish one of the characters had said, whichever way this falls out, the kid is a victim of the systems in which he lives. Nobody states that. It's all about whether his adoptive parents are good people or bad people, whether the Cardassians are a good or a bad people. It comes back to that sometimes very, not always, but sometimes very reductive Star Trek way of thinking, working out who the bad guy is here. And I think you're right. it is going to go more into shades of grey as the series goes on. And it doesn't do a terrible job within this episode of making characters' motives ambiguous, making us second guess who is good and who is evil. But yeah, it doesn't wrap it up in a way that really reflects what's happened to this poor kid, which felt really fundamental to what happens in the episode. The setup of it reminds me a little bit of the episode we saw last time, Invasive Procedures, whereby there were lots of characters in the scene and it wasn't clear what anyone's motives were. It wasn't clear who was in charge.
That's a good comparison. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, I think the script really took its time to untangle what was happening. So for us to see a Bajoran adult accompanied by a Cardassian child, accompanied by an alien whose race I don't think is ever described. We don't know where Zolan comes from. Yeah, it's just a nice mystery, and it's mysterious in and of itself. And yeah, sure, Bashir and Garak look over and go, "Oh, that's peculiar," but they didn't really have to. It is peculiar, and it's a really nice, mysterious, but it fits in the world. Starting for an episode.
No, I also like that, definitely. It's a reminder that Deep Space Nine is this big open system, and in a again, we're coming off the Enterprise where it's a closed system, and if somebody new is on the ship, they're there for a reason. Deep Space Nine, somebody's just passing through. They don't have any reason to interact.
They haven't been beamed aboard. It's not that they've been met by an ambassadorial team every time someone comes aboard.
Which you would need on Picard's Enterprise. It's a reminder that Deep Space Nine is a massive open port. Lots of people pass through it on their own stories that may never intersect with the senior staff. So it's almost pure chance, although as we learn by the end of the episode, it's not pure chance at all, and this whole thing's a massive scheme. But it's a reminder that these things can happen on Deep Space Nine, which I love as a refreshing reminder that this is not TNG. As I've said in many episodes before, I love TNG, it's great. Deep Space Nine is its own beast, and it's starting to stand on its own feet here, and this is a good example of it. So I was very excited by this beginning.
But yeah, unfortunately, at this point, I got really distracted by Gul Dukat's slutty neckline.
Let me just pop this on the screen for you now.
The rest of this scene, I've got very sparse notes because I was just... I mean, look, what is that for? I mean, I appreciate that, as I learned from friends, basically the makeup geeks on Deep Space Nine found that Marcolema has a very slender neck, and they thought, well, we can build on that. We can use that as part of the Cardassian body structure. And so they do, and it suits him really well. But why is he accentuated? The neckline, I think, by 21st century clothing standards is one we would see on feminine clothing more often than male clothing. I think women's necks are seen as a source of sexual interest and not necessarily men's so much. So it was a bold choice, and I can't help it. I really like it. I'm kind of entranced by it, and I feel really uncomfortable with it because the guy is a Nazi analog, and I'm just here going, oh my god, yeah, but how the man with sexy neck be evil? Why is he here getting his neck out? Who's it for? I just stopped making notes at this point for a bit while I tried to reckon with myself.
So yeah, I've talked a lot about how this podcast is the combining of my interests and Kat's interests, and their impressions of Deep Space Nine will be different to mine, and that's why I'm still rattled by the thought of Dukat and Drag, and now I've got to deal with Dukat as an entity of allure. This is not something I approached Dukat as. I approach him as a great villain, and you're now exposing me to interpretations I'd never considered before, Kat, and for that, I guess I'm thankful.
It's always a good thing to broaden your worldview, Tim.
Yeah, 100%.
Unfortunately, we're now broadening it into Rule 34.
Listen, right, okay. I'm not a complete child, right? I have a Tumblr account, and I, follow a lot of Deep Space Nine hashtags, so I see a lot of interpretations of the characters of Deep Space Nine and their relationships. Sure, Spurk has been with us since the 60s. We talked about this a bit in the setup. I guess I've just, never talked directly one-on-one with somebody who, is, I think it's safe to say, more familiar with that kind of world of reinterpreting characters and their interactions. So this is just, it's something new to me, and you're going to have to bear with me while I wrap my head around it. But I have never in 30 years looked at Gul Dukat and gone, nice scales. It's just, oh my god! And we're going to discover.
I don't blame you. It took me by surprise as well.
Lieutenant Cat in the chat there does point out as well, the heart of it is evil people are hot. I'm going to draw the obvious parallel to that other 90s show, Spike from Buffy. Incredible villain, very physically appealing. When put against the straight-laced Giles, or the Scoobies, I can see how his nature is also very provocative and exciting. And in the same way, Ducat occupies much of the same space. He is a counter to the upright, moral, Federation crew. So I can see where you're coming from. It's a bit harder for me to wrap my head around, but I think it's going to be fascinating going on this journey with you, Kat, and your interpretations of all this is going to be amazing. But don't expect me to immediately understand what the hell you're talking about from the day.
Thank you for extending that effort to understand, Tim. I really appreciate it, and thank you for not just going right now. My podcast, that's enough.
No, not at all. It is fascinating. It's just it's taking me out of a comfort space, which is what this podcast should do.
And we're just up to final thoughts now, which I think it's all been said, really. It was an episode that, in a quick 45 minutes, covered a lot of issues about racial and cultural prejudice, the rights of children, which it should have done more on, frankly. I liked Keiko's involvement as a Japanese character, talking about war and occupation. I think in the American context, that's very relevant, and I like that she's there.
That's a really good point.
I think it did a good job of mixing the ethical problems with the political intrigue, with the personal. It's an episode that is doing a lot, and it does it in very fast motion, and none of it feels jarring. It doesn't feel as if we go from a very sad scene to but the Gold Ducat is about to be brought down. None of it feels incongruous. It all feels appropriate, and it feels like the narrative flows well. I think I didn't feel that it got stalled at any point, or as if where I didn't know what was going on, it was because the writers didn't want me to know what was going on. They were adequately maintaining mystery, and as Garrick says, just dropping those crumbs in good time for you to gradually work out what's happening without feeling frustrated that you can't figure it out, because that's not what it's about. It's not a deduction show. It is just about seeing the plot unfold.
100% it is. 100% it is. And it was, as we've always mentioned, a tightrope to walk between those things, and also to keep it under 45 minutes, and to appeal to an audience that they're still trying to half steal from TNG or half just win over to sci-fi. I think we forget at our peril that they have many conflicting demands on what they write, produce, film, and edit, and all of that. So it's a hell of a mountain to surmount, and to do all of that and get this out, which I think we can agree that is a pretty good standout episode.
Oh gosh, yes. And then to have two asshats look at it over 30 years later and pull it apart with all of the cultural knowledge that we've derived since it was written.
Well, I think you'll find we wouldn't actually do it like that. But of course we wouldn't. It's 30 years ago. And it was American primetime programming. There's so much they could not
for the
show.
most part, it still stands up
and
really well.
That's the miracle.
We've identified some differences that, whether we as individuals or our culture would want to be done differently now. But broadly speaking, it's a really well-told story. And I do wish the ending had been different. But that's part of that is just in-world sadness for Rugal. It's that I wish things had gone better for him, rather than just that I think the characters made the wrong choices.
The episode ends, but the story continues in a spin-off book by the acclaimed Star Trek author Una McCormack, and it carries on in a book called The Never-Ending Sacrifice. I'll pop that on the screen there, which is in itself a reference to a Cardassian literary genre, which they love, which is that you never stop sacrificing for the state. You are always brought up to serve the people of Cardassia, and you make grand sacrifices so that Cardassia may live on. And Rugal's story carries on throughout the history of Deep Space Nine and a few of the spin-off novels as well. So there is more to learn, and I wish I could tell you it got any happier. It doesn't. So there you go.
I do really appreciate that his story was picked up and carried on, though, because we see the beginning of it.
Exactly.
And then it presumably gets dropped forever. I'm not going to assume Rugal actually comes back in the show.
I don't think it's a spoiler to say he doesn't. And so, I
really appreciate that a novelist saw what we saw, presumably some of what we saw in the episode, that potential for that character story to be continued, and has actually done it.
100%. They do, and Una's a great author, and it's a great, compelling book. And yeah, and I'm afraid it runs with the regular themes, which is the, you know what, good stories don't come out of Cardassia very often. It's just not a happy place, and not a lot of what happens there is happy, and that is bordering on the spoiler. So I'm not going to dwell any more on it. I just wanted to tell people that Rugel's story does continue in a book. But I love this picture. It epitomizes so much of Deep Space Nine for me, and I love that this one fleeting moment was in it, and I'm so happy because it left me with an episode I love. It sets the ball rolling on so many storylines that are going to come up time and again throughout this wonderful show, and I am so glad you're here to see it, Kat. I can't wait to hear what you think about some more of it.
Oh, I am so glad there's so much more still to go. I'm really enjoying looking at each episode in this much depth when there is so much more lore yet to come.
Yeah, that's the problem. I'm really worried that this we just physically cannot spend less than 2 hours talking about an episode.